the city of Constantinople, 1623. A gray mist hangs low over the Bosphorus, heavy with salt and silence. Inside the vast marble skeleton of the Topkapı Palace, time itself feels trapped. The faint sound of water dripping from the hammam fountains, the slow rustle of silk curtains, the heartbeat of an empire that never sleeps. Then, from somewhere deep within the labyrinth of corridors, it comes, a sound so sharp it cleaves the dawn in half. A scream, not of rage, but of something older, something primal. Welcome back to Underbelly Bloodline, where we unearth the stories the world tried to bury. If you believe history hides its darkest truths behind polite lies, then subscribe and open this file with me. Servants stop mid-step. Eunuchs freeze with oil lamps in trembling hands. For a breathless moment, even the wind holds its tongue. The sound dies quickly, swallowed by the palace walls, as if the marble itself were ordered to forget. But in the royal wing, behind doors of carved cedar and gold, a young girl lies trembling. Fatma Sultan, barely 15, born into power, but raised on silence. She is the daughter of the great Sultan Ahmed I, the man who built the Blue Mosque, and the child of the empire's most feared woman, Kosum Sultan, whose whispers could end a dynasty. Fatma's room smells of jasmine and iron. Her bed is too large for her small frame. Around her, the palace women hover, soft voices, cold hands, each pretending not to notice the faint mark on her wrist or the shadow beneath her eyes. Because in this palace, compassion is dangerous, and curiosity is a death wish. The empire will call this a domestic disturbance. But the truth, what happened in that room, will be buried beneath 1,000 official decrees and rewritten histories. It will become one of those palace secrets no poet dares to speak of. Yet, somehow, its echo will linger through generations. Some say every royal bloodline carries a curse, not born from magic, but from power itself. The more tightly a family grips the throne, the more it begins to devour its own. And here, at the heart of the Ottoman Empire, that hunger begins with a single scream. Before we step deeper into this shadowed palace, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Because before this story ends, you'll see how even royal blood can run cold. Subscribe to Underbelly Bloodline, where every whisper of history hides a darker truth. Long before that scream echoed through the marble halls, a girl was born beneath the gold-domed ceilings of the Topkapı Palace, a daughter of the empire itself. Her name was Fatma Sultan, the child of Sultan Ahmed I, builder of the Blue Mosque, and Kosum Sultan, a woman whose whispers could bend the will of sultans and silence entire chambers. The night of Fatma's birth was said to shimmer. The scent of rosewater filled the harem. Silk curtains swayed as court astrologers whispered omens. They said the stars above Constantinople burned brighter that night, aligning in strange patterns, as though the heavens themselves sensed what this child would one day carry: the unbearable weight of royal blood. Fatma's childhood was carved from gold and shadow. Her days began with the recitation of poetry from Persian masters, the plucking of oud strings, and lessons in history, faith, and silence. She learned to speak 6 tongues before she could name her own desires. Her tutors praised her grace, a mind of light in a world ruled by men. But even brilliance could not change her fate, because in the empire, a princess is not raised. She is prepared. Every smile, every step, every glance is rehearsed for a marriage she will not choose. Her worth is measured not by her thoughts, but by her usefulness to the dynasty, a thread to be tied, a bridge between men who hunger for power. And so, while other children played in the courtyards, Fatma learned how to bow without trembling, how to hide her emotions behind kohl-lined eyes, and how to keep secrets that were never hers to tell. Her mother, Kosum, ruled from behind a curtain of gold-threaded veils, powerful, untouchable, and utterly alone. Fatma watched her in awe and fear. To love such a mother was to love a storm. To be her daughter was to inherit both her brilliance and her curse. For in the house of Osman, power was a birthright and a sentence. The same blood that crowned them also bound them, strangling freedom beneath the weight of duty and desire. And so, Fatma's destiny was sealed, not by choice, but by lineage, born of power, bound by blood. Before we move deeper into her gilded cage, tell me, do you believe power ever comes without a price? The Topkapı Palace gleamed like a jewel upon the hill, its domes catching the sunlight, its gardens heavy with lilac and myrtle. From afar, it looked like paradise. But inside its jeweled heart lay a secret every woman eventually learned. Paradise was a prison with better walls. The imperial harem, a labyrinth of silk corridors, latticed windows, and whispered ambitions. It was said to be the most beautiful cage in the world. Hundreds of women lived there, concubines, tutors, servants, mothers, all bound by silence and surveillance. Each one was both prisoner and rival, her worth measured by her obedience, her beauty, and the favor of unseen men. And in that maze of perfumes and fear, Fatma Sultan walked like a shadow among peacocks, the daughter of a sultan, the child of power. Yet even she felt the chains. Every morning, the call to prayer echoed through marble halls, followed by the shuffle of silk slippers and the faint clinking of jewelry, sounds that reminded her the palace was awake, watching. Behind every jeweled curtain, alliances were forged and destroyed with a glance. One wrong word could banish a woman to the outer chambers. Or worse, the cold silence of the old palace, where forgotten wives waited for death. Fatma learned early to keep her voice soft, her eyes lower than her thoughts. But she saw everything. She saw the eunuchs who moved like ghosts, carrying messages between rivals. She saw her mother, Qasem Sultan, glide through the chambers with calm authority, a queen among caged souls. Fatma loved her, feared her, and pitied her all at once, because even the most powerful woman in the empire could not escape the bars built by men. At night, when the torches flickered and the laughter died down, Fatma would press her hand to the cold marble wall and wonder how many generations of women had done the same, tracing their own invisible scars across the palace stone. The harem, for all its beauty, was not a sanctuary. It was a stage, a place where innocence died quietly, drowned beneath the weight of silk and protocol. And Fatma, though wrapped in gold, was already beginning to suffocate. The year was 1621, and the empire's heart beat to the sound of conquest. Outside the palace gates, soldiers marched through the streets of Constantinople, their armor glinting beneath the winter sun. Inside, beneath the same skies, a very different kind of battle was being waged. One fought not with swords, but with signatures. At 15, Fatma Sultan had become more symbol than daughter. Her beauty was spoken of in whispers, her manners rehearsed to perfection. But her name had become a tool. The empire needed alliances. Her mother, Qasem Sultan, understood this well. The dynasty survived on marriages that were less about love and more about loyalty. And so, the decision came swiftly, dressed in ceremony and deception. Fatma would marry Kara Mustafa Pasha, a man twice her age, a soldier carved from war and ambition. His victories were written in blood across foreign lands. His presence filled the council chambers like a storm. To the court, this was a marriage of power. To Fatma, it was the tightening of a noose. The announcement was made in the hall of petitions, where the scent of incense could not mask the dread rising in her chest. As the visitors offered their congratulations, she stood still, her face hidden behind a jeweled veil. No one saw the tremor in her hands, only the empire's promise of unity and strength. Later that night, alone in her chamber, she sat before her mirror, staring at her reflection as if it belonged to someone else. Behind her, the faint hum of music drifted from the courtyards, the empire celebrating her fate. She whispered his name once, Kara Mustafa, and felt the weight of it sink into her bones. He was said to be ruthless, disciplined, unyielding, a man who bent nations to his will, and soon she would be his prize. The empire would call it a union of glory. But to the young princess, it was something far more haunting, a wedding that felt more like a burial. The candles burned low, the walls of Topkapı closed in, and for the first time, Fatma understood what her mother had meant when she said, "Even the crown cuts deeper than a blade." They called it Turbi Mubarak, the sacred education, a name wrapped in holiness, whispered in reverence. But beneath its veil lay something far darker. It began in the dim hours before dawn, when the palace lamps still flickered with blue smoke. Fatma Sultan was taken from her chambers, her silk slippers silent on the stone floors. The women who guided her spoke softly, avoiding her gaze. Even they knew this was no ceremony of blessing. This was the breaking of a soul. The chamber they entered was unlike any other. No gold, no fragrance, no warmth, just cold marble, walls slick with condensation, and the faint scent of oil and wax. At the center stood a mannequin, carved from ivory, dressed in bridal white, faceless and perfect. A priestess of the palace, robed in silver, began the recitation. Prayers twisted into commands, words of virtue reshaped into obedience. Fatma was told this ritual would prepare her spirit for marriage, that through surrender she would earn divine favor. But every act was a lesson in silence, every gesture a warning. Her hands were bound not with rope, but with tradition. Her voice was taken not by force, but by fear. When she laughed, nervous, fragile, she was told laughter was unbecoming of a wife. When she asked why, the answer came in the cold rhythm of ritual: because your will belongs to your husband, and through him, to God. The hours passed like years. Her body knelt, rose, knelt again, until even the sound of her breath seemed too loud. By the end, her reflection, once bright, curious, alive, was gone. In its place stood a hollow version of a princess, shaped not by love or destiny, but by command. The palace would remember it as a sacred rite. But the truth would live only in Fatma's eyes. That night, she returned to her chambers trembling. Her laughter vanished, her words reduced to whispers. The girl who had once dreamed of poetry and sunlight had been replaced by a figure of obedience, cloaked in gold and silence. The sacred education was not about faith, it was about control, a quiet erasure of self, disguised as divine duty. March 15th, 1623. Constantinople glowed that night, lanterns burning like fireflies across the Bosphorus, the air thick with the scent of musk and myrrh. The empire called it a wedding celebration. Drums thundered through the streets, cannon fire kissed the sky, and voices chanted the names of Fatma Sultan and Kara Mustafa Pasha, the union that would bind power to power. But behind the marble walls of Topkapı Palace, the music sounded different. It echoed hollow and cold, like the tolling of a distant bell. Fatma's attendants dressed her in gold-threaded silk, each layer heavier than the last. The bridal crown sat upon her head like a burden rather than a blessing. As they painted her lips with crimson dye, she watched her reflection blur. The face staring back was that of a stranger. Beyond the walls, the empire rejoiced. Inside, a girl prepared to disappear. When the procession began, she walked in silence through corridors lit by trembling candlelight. Her footsteps fell soft upon the carpets woven with the faces of forgotten brides. Eunuchs bowed, courtiers smiled, none met her eyes. To them, she was not a person. She was an offering, the living proof of loyalty between throne and sword. The doors to her chamber opened with a groan that seemed to echo across centuries. Inside waited Kara Mustafa Pasha, dressed in victory and expectation. His gaze was cold, assessing, the look of a man who saw not a bride, but a possession. The candles cast long shadows that danced across the walls. The empire called this the night of union. But to Fatma, it felt like conquest. Every movement, every word, every breath she gave that night was not hers. It belonged to the empire, to history, to him. Outside, the drums still thundered, drowning out whatever sound escaped the chamber. The city cheered as the empire slept peacefully, believing it had witnessed a glorious union. But in truth, it had watched a quiet sacrifice, a girl surrendering her freedom beneath the weight of a dynasty's hunger. By dawn, the celebration had faded, the fires burned low, and Fatma Sultan, once a child of light, had become the empire's most silent prisoner. After that night, the palace grew quiet, too quiet. The laughter that once drifted through Fatma Sultan's chambers vanished like smoke in winter air. Her attendants moved softly, whispering prayers as they brushed her hair or changed her silks. But she no longer answered. Her lips, once alive with poetry and song, now stayed frozen in silence. The imperial physicians came first, men in robes of emerald and gold, armed with scrolls and superstition. They pressed fingers to her wrist, studied the pallor of her skin, and murmured to one another in the language of denial. Their diagnosis would become infamous: virginal melancholy. But it was no melancholy. It was trauma, the kind that steals language, that crushes the breath before it leaves the throat. Fatma's silence was not weakness. It was the only rebellion left to her, a refusal to perform, to smile, to pretend. She would not give the empire her voice, not after it had taken her soul. Days blurred into months. She stopped eating, stopped weeping, stopped fighting. Servants said her eyes had changed, once bright as a morning sky, now clouded, distant, like she was looking somewhere beyond the walls. They called it a curse, but it was simpler than that. Her spirit had fled where her body could not. And then there was Kara Mustafa Pasha, the man who had conquered kingdoms but could not conquer his guilt. He began to change too. At first, he blamed her silence on insolence, but when he saw her eyes, hollow, vacant, unreachable, something in him broke. The warrior who had once defied empires began to drown in his own remorse. He turned to opium, seeking mercy in its haze. The same hands that once wielded a sword now trembled around a pipe. In the smoky glow of his chamber, he saw her face everywhere, not the silent wife he possessed, but the girl he had ruined. The palace whispered of an unspoken haunting, of two souls, one broken, one rotting, trapped together by duty, yet drifting further apart with each passing night. Outside, the empire still stood tall, golden, and proud. But within those walls, an invisible decay had begun, the kind that no decree, no prayer, no ritual could ever cleanse. Years passed like ghosts drifting through the corridors of Topkapı Palace. The seasons changed, tulips bloomed and withered in the royal gardens, empires rose and fell beyond the marble gates. Yet Fatma Sultan remained frozen in time, trapped behind the veil of her own silence. They said she had recovered. They said she was serene. They said she had found peace in motherhood, in duty, in the rhythm of palace life. But those who looked closer, those who dared to meet her eyes, saw the truth. Behind that flawless mask was a woman unmoored, her voice buried beneath layers of silk and sorrow. She bore children, each one another thread binding her to the dynasty's endless web. She smiled for portraits, attended ceremonies, stood beside her husband when the empire demanded its perfect image. Yet her silence spoke louder than any decree. It became her legend, the princess who never raised her voice again. In the candlelit halls, the young concubines whispered her name with reverence and dread. Some believed she was blessed with divine restraint. Others said she had made a vow of silence to escape her pain. But the truth was simpler and far more tragic. Fatma's silence was not chosen. It was the scar left by a wound no one dared to name. Sometimes, at night, servants claimed they heard her humming softly, a melody with no words, drifting like smoke from her chambers. Perhaps it was a fragment of the girl she once was, the one who learned Persian poems and dreamed of stars, the one who believed that knowledge could protect her from fate. But that girl was long gone. All that remained was a shadow wrapped in silk, performing perfection for an empire built on appearances. Her beauty became myth, her stillness mistaken for grace, and the court poets, too afraid to tell the truth, wrote of her as the silent flower of the Ottoman garden, never realizing that what they called serenity was simply the quiet of a woman who had nothing left to say. Her silence became the empire's mirror, beautiful, cold, and unbreakable. And within it, generations would see their own reflection, the cost of power paid in the currency of a woman's voice. 1652. The empire stood at the height of its glory. Its banners stretched across 3 continents, its palaces gleamed like mirages. But within the golden walls of Topkapı, a single window glowed through the night, dim and flickering. Behind that window lay Fatma Sultan, the woman once called the silent flower of the Ottoman court. The official records would later claim she died of a fever. But those who served her, the handmaidens who brushed her hair, the eunuchs who guarded her door, they told another story. They said Fatma died of memory. For years, her silence had been her shield. Yet, in her final months, something began to change. She would wake from dreams trembling, whispering fragments of forgotten words. She asked for no priests, no prayers, only for her window to remain open at night so the wind could touch her face. Those who saw her then swore she looked more spirit than flesh. Her hair, once black as ink, had turned silver. Her eyes shimmered with a strange peace, the kind that comes not from healing, but from surrender. On the night she died, The palace was unnaturally still. Even the fountains seemed to quiet themselves. The attendants kept vigil by candlelight, and just before dawn they heard her whisper, faint, melodic, carried by breath rather than voice. None could understand the words. Some said it was Persian poetry. Others believed it was the language of angels. But the oldest servant, the one who had known her since she was a child, claimed she was speaking to the stars, calling them by name, as if they were the only ones who had ever listened. When the final candle went out, so did she. Her passing was marked by silence, fitting, perhaps, for the woman who had lived her life inside it. The empire wept in ceremony, but behind their tears was relief. A living ghost had finally gone to rest. No monument bears her truth. No chronicle dares to write what really broke her. But they say on quiet nights, when the palace walls breathe with the wind, you can still hear her voice, soft, distant, rising like smoke toward the heavens. Fatma Sultan, the woman who was never allowed to speak, yet whose silence still haunts the empire. History remembers the conquerors, the sultans, the viziers, the men who carved the empire's name into the bones of continents. But history forgets the daughters. It forgets Fatma Sultan, and the many like her, whose lives were spent as currency in the empire's silent economy of power. Her story never appeared in the gilded chronicles of the Ottoman court. No historian dared write of the girl who was broken before she could bloom, the woman whose silence became more powerful than any speech. Because to tell her story would be to confess a truth the empire could not bear, that while it conquered 3 continents, it devoured its own blood first. The harem, that jewel of mystery in every traveler's tale, was not a garden of pleasure. It was a gilded graveyard of voices. Behind every silk curtain was a daughter traded for an alliance, a sister silenced for honor, a mother erased for the stability of the throne. Their laughter was measured, their love forbidden, their tears swept away by servants before dawn. Fatma's name faded from the records within a decade. Her portraits were removed. Her tombstone bore no title, only the phrase, "She was loved by God." But love was not what she was given. She was given obedience. She was given duty. She was given a silence that became her only form of rebellion. And yet, her absence still whispers. Because every empire that rises on control must one day face the ghosts of the controlled. The Ottoman Empire may have ruled by sword and scripture, but the true cost was spiritual, paid by the women who had no voice to protest. Fatma's story, once buried under centuries of marble and incense, now seeps back through the cracks, not as a cry of vengeance, but as a reminder that power built on suffering always turns inward, that no dynasty, no matter how glorious, escapes the rot it plants in its own heart. So tonight, as we close her story, remember, empires fall, thrones crumble, but the silence of the forgotten, it endures.